Quick demo of this video. In this ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial, we'll implement user registration, authentication, authorization, and user profile management. All of these features can easily be implemented in your MVC application with the help of ASP.NET Core Identity Library. Finally, as a bonus, I'll be providing you with the necessary resources for further customizing this application. I'm sure you will find this tutorial helpful for your upcoming .NET Core projects, so please watch till the very end. What's up YouTube, welcome to CodAffection. Let's go ahead with building a complete authentication system in ASP.NET Core MVC. Before going forward, I would like to thank for your donations through PayPal and other platforms for my previous works. In order to make more and more quality tutorials like this, you can also support me through PayPal and other platforms. Details are given in video description. I have already discussed this topic in one of my old video using ASP.NET Core 3.1. It's been 3 years now. The same steps will not work with the latest .NET Core version, so I decided to make that video again with the latest version of .NET. Now without further ado, let's get started with the topic. It is obvious that there are two ways to add the identity library to an ASP.NET Core project. You could add the identity library while creating the project, or you could add it later in the development process. Independent of when you add the library into the project, you could follow the steps that I'm showing here. So first of all, let me create a .NET Core MVC project. Now select this project template here, ASP.NET Core MVC. You could easily find this project template if you select C# from this first drop down and Web from this last drop down here. Click on Next. I will name this project as Auth System. Select the location where you want to save the project. Click on Next. We are creating this project in .NET 7. If you select these individual accounts from this drop down, the identity library will be added to this project. However, I believe that it would be better to import the library and its UI interfaces later for a thorough understanding of the topic we are discussing. Since we are creating this project for demonstration, I will uncheck this HTTPS configuration here. Let's create the project. So here we have the brand new ASP.NET Core MVC project. Without making any changes inside the application, let me run this. Now this is how the fresh MVC app looks like. Now back to Visual Studio. Now let me add the identity library into this project. Before that, let me open this project configuration here so that you could see the install and NuGet packages into the project. Currently we don't have any package installed into this project. You could check that inside this dependencies also. We only have some frameworks. We don't have any NuGet packages installed. Now let's build this project. Now let's add the identity library. For that, right click on this project, then add new scaffold item. From this left panel, select identity, then select this identity here, click on add. Now inside this window, you could see the list of Razor pages available in ASP.NET Core Identity. You could select the Razor pages that you want to customize. For now, I will be selecting these pages, login and register. So the rest of these pages will be loaded directly from the Identity.UI library with their default behaviors and features. Now from this option here, we could select a layout page for the selected views here. So I will select the default MVC layout page, which is inside this views shade folder _ layout.cshtml. Click on OK. Now here we have to provide a DB context class. For that, click on this plus button. I will name this class file as auth_db_context. Click on add. Now we have to select a model class for the user. Click on plus button here. I will name it as application user. Now click on add. As you can see, behind the scene it is installing the required packages into this application. Finally, here we have added the ASP.NET Core Identity into this MVC project. And these are the required NuGet packages, which you can see inside this dependencies packages here. So this is the main package, Identity.UI. It contains the Razor pages that we just talked about, and here is the newly added area, identity. If you expand that, you could see these folders, data and pages. Inside these pages, we have the Razor views for the respective views, login and register. And inside this data folder, we have the model, application user for entity framework and the corresponding DB context class. Now let me build this project again. While building this project, we got an error saying that there is a missing using statement, which is inside this program.cs file. Like we had some changes inside the application after adding the library, we also have some changes inside this program.cs file also. We'll explain that in a bit. Now let's add the missing using statement for this model class here. For that you can use the shortcut hold control then press period. So here we have the namespace areas.identity.data. You could verify that inside this model class application user identity.data. Now back to this program.cs file, which is the starting point for executing a .NET Core project. Inside the file we have mainly two objects. First of all, we have builder, which is created as a result of invoking this method here, create builder. We'll use this builder object to add more services into this application. And here we have the second object app, which is created as a result of calling this method build from builder. And this app object is used for the configuration of this project. Finally, with the execution of this run method, the whole application is open in our default web browser. So that's the overview of this program.cs file. Now, in order to view these Razor pages, login and register, we have to add the support for Razor pages inside the application. That we can do inside this program.cs file like this: builder.services.add Razor pages. By default, newly created MVC project only had the support for the conventional controller with separate views. Now we have added the support for Razor pages. Now in order to add routes for the Identity.UI Razor pages into this application, we have to do this. By default, here we have the routes for the default conventional MVC controller. Now let's add the routes from Identity Razor pages. For that we could do this app.map Razor pages. That's it. All of the routes for the Identity.UI Razor pages are already configured inside the library. We are only importing it here. Now let's build this project. Now let's try to access these Razor pages for login and register from Identity.UI. So here we have the running instance. In order to access the login page, here is the corresponding URL: identity/account/login. Boom, that's it. And you could see the registration form like this: /register. Now, as I already mentioned, the meat of this video is to know how to customize ASP.NET Core Identity as per our requirement. We'll get into that in a bit. First of all, let's start with small customizations. That is, showing both of these forms for registration and login form inside a Bootstrap nav tabs. So back to the IDE. Let's start from this default layout page here. So this layout page contains the HTML wrapper for rest of the controllers or views inside this MVC application. And here you could see that here we have already imported Bootstrap by default. So we'll be using the same for styling the user interface inside this application. And here we have the global style sheet site.css, which can be seen inside this folder here. Now inside the body we have the header. Inside that we have shown this NavBar here, Bootstrap NavBar, and then within this container, this placeholder at render body will be replaced with the HTML from this given routes here. So that's the overview of how this user interface is rendered inside a default MVC application. Now to show both of these pages, login and register inside a tab control, apart from this default layout page, I'm gonna create a layout page specific to both of these pages, login and register, containing a tab control that I will add inside this identity pages folder here. So right click on it, then add new item, then select this Razor layout here and let it be _auth layout. Click on add. Now this layout is created as a main layout, which is not what we want. We already have a main layout _layout here. We'll be using that as a layout for this newly created layout here. So let's get rid of these HTML codes and let's specify the layout for this layout page as this default layout here. So here we go. Layout is equal to /views/shared/_layout CSHTML. Now let's create a tab control. You could see the corresponding documentation here, tabs. We'll be customizing this Bootstrap now tabs as per our requirement. First of all, we need a div for Bootstrap grid system. Now let's put everything inside this div at center, and here we have a grid column having 5 column space. Let's apply a top margin of the range 5. We'll be wrapping the tab control inside a Bootstrap card. So here we have the corresponding outer div. Now for the further customization, here is our custom class login logout card. First of all, we have the card header. Then after that, we have the card body. The tab control header will be shown inside this card header here with this unordered list. Now these are the necessary tab header classes: nav, then nav tabs, then card header tabs. Now let's add two li elements for both login and register, having the class nav item. Inside that we have this anchor element having this class nav link. Now let's provide the corresponding URL inside this attribute that I will copy paste from here. Inside that we will show this text login. Now like this we need one more li element for registration. So I will copy paste this here. The corresponding URL will be like this /register. Now based on the selected tab, corresponding content should be shown inside this card body. For that, I will add this div with these classes row, then justify content at center. So here we have a bootstrap grid. And we want to apply margin on y-axis of the range 4. Inside that we can have this placeholder, MVC placeholder at render body. So here we have the new layout page, auth layout for both of these pages, login and register. Now for this register and login page, we want to set this new layout page, auth layout, as its layout. So let me copy this and pasting here inside this register page. Now let's provide the corresponding relative path tiled /areas /identity /pages / auth layout. Now let me copy this and pasting inside this login page. Let's build this. After successful build, back to the application. Looks like we have an error. The layout view could not be located. The following locations were searched. After a thorough inspection, I didn't find any typo inside the given path here. If you face the same problem even after providing the correct relative URL for the layout page, you could do this. Right click on this layout page, then go to properties. Then inside this build action drop down, select content. Okay, now let's close this properties. Build this project again, back to the app. But this time we have another error saying that the following sessions have been defined but not have been rendered by the page that we have just created, which is the auth layout page. So we are not using this script section inside our auth layout page. You could see this script section inside the identity pages, login and register. It must be loaded inside the default layout script section. But in between these pages and this layout page, now we have this middle layout page, auth layout. So in order to keep the connection inside this new layout, we have to specify the session like this. Add section scripts. Just copy paste this section from the default layout here. That's it. Let's build the project again. Back to the app. Boom. See, here we have the tab controls, and inside the tab you could see the pages from the corresponding views. Now to customize this tab control, open the global style sheet site.css. Now here is the custom CSS for styling the element tab control. Save this, build the project, back to the app. That's it. Okay, now based on the current page we are rendering, we have to mark the active tab from this tab control. For that we need some jQuery. So back to the auth layout. If you check the default layout page, you could see that the jQuery library is already added into this project by default. Now we can make use of that to mark the active tab from this tab header. So here we go. So first of all, we can have this script tag. Everything inside this function will be executed once the page is completely loaded. Now first of all, we have created this variable current page, and which is initialized with the URL of the current page. And then we are iterating through the li element anchor elements that we have provided here. So here we have the each function. Inside that we have the callback to be executed on each iteration. And inside that we have this variable which is corresponding to each of the anchor elements. And then here we have the if clause. Within that we are comparing the current anchor element href attribute that we have provided here with the current URL. And based on that we are adding the active clause to it. So this will highlight the respective tab header. So let's build this. Back to the app. So currently we are inside the login tab. Now let's switch into the register tab. Boom. Now before going forward, I want to change this app font into Google font Roboto, which is my favorite font. So let's search for Google font. In order to remove previously selected fonts, click on this remove all here. So here we have the Roboto font. Select it and choose the appropriate font weights 300, 400 and 700. Copy the second link tag here. Back to the app. Open the file layout page and let's paste it inside the header. Open the global style sheet site.css and let's change the font family here. Now here we have the font Roboto. Now as a backup, I will provide this sans serif. Build the project. Back to the app. That's it. So that's all about tab control navigation. Next, we're going to customize this registration form here. Here we are only asking for the user email and password. Now into this registration form, I want to add the extra fields for first name and last name. How can we do so? For that, back to the project here. First of all, we want to understand how this ASP.NET Core Identity works inside this MVC project. As you already know, here we have the corresponding pages for login and register. And inside this data folder, we have the model classes for entity framework. Now inside the library, this model class identity user represents a user model. And here we are just inheriting the base class into this application user so that we can extend the user model. Now into the user entity, we have to add these properties for first name and last name. First of all, we have first name, which is of the type string. Now you could see the green squiggly line along with this property indicating this property must be initialized somewhere inside the class. In order to hide this indication here, just hover the cursor on the property like this. Then you could see this bulb symbol, expand it. Then go to this option here, suppress or configure issues. Inside the severity, select silent. That's it. Now let's specify the column data type. So here we have the attribute column. Let's assign the data type with this parameter type name. Let it be nvarchar 100. Now since we are adding a personal data, we have to add this attribute here, personal data. Now let's copy paste this for the next property, last name. Last name. Now along with the default properties inside this identity user, we have added these two properties. You will see all of the properties inside this identity user model once we do the migration. So here we have done with the application user model. Now here we have the authDB context class, which is also inheriting from the corresponding Identity.DB context class here. Now as you know, in Entity Framework, we will interact with the DB, physical DB, through an instance of DB context class. So an instance of this authDB context will be automatically created inside this program.cs file here through dependency injection. You could see it here. We are creating an instance of authDB context through dependency injection. So into this DB context constructor parameter here, we have to pass the DB provider. It might be SQL Server, MySQL, etc. and the connection string to the physical DB. So here we have specified the DB provider as SQL Server by invoking this method use SQL Server. And here we have provided the connection string, and this connection string must be there inside this app settings.json with the given key authDB connection. Now instead of this local DB instance, I'm gonna use a separate instance, local, and the name of the instance would be SQL Express, and the corresponding DB would be auth system DB. Since we are using the local authentication method, we have set trusted connection as true, and in order to execute multiple queries at a given time, we have set this attribute here. Now we have to set one more attribute, which is trusted server certificate. So here we have done with the DB connection string. Now if you are having any difficulty in generating a connection string according to your machine, let me know in the comment box below. Now here we have set everything for the DB migration. So first of all, build this project. After successful build, select the project from Solution Explorer, then go to Tools, then NuGet Package Manager, then Package Manager Console. In my case, it is opened inside this bottom panel here. Now first of all, let's create a migration with this command add migration, and let's provide a name here, initial create. Hit enter. As a result of that, you could see the new folder migrations here. Within that, we have a C# file with the given migration name here containing the C# code for generating the corresponding SQL Server tables. So far we have not created a corresponding physical DB. In order to do so, we have to execute this second command here, update database. Hit enter. It looks like we have done the migration without any problem. Now if there is any error in the given DB connection string here, you will get an error by executing this second command, update database. If that's the case, double check your DB connection string provided here. Okay, fine. Now let's see the physical DB that we have just created through migration. For that, let me open the management studio. Now let's connect with the same SQL Server instance that we have given inside the connection string. Expand this databases. So here we have the new database auth system DB. Let's expand it. And here we have the tables. So these are the default tables inside an ASP.NET Core Identity library. It's already mentioned inside this MSDN documentation here. You could see each of the entities and what they represent. I'll be providing the necessary references like this in video description, so please check it out. So this table, ASP.NET users represent the users inside the library. Let's check its design. Here you could see various columns for a user entity. Along with that, you could see the newly added properties or columns here, first name and last name. Now with that being done, back to Visual Studio. Next we are going to add input fields for newly added columns, first name and last name. So head over to this register page here. Actually, this is a razor page. So this file with the extension CSHTML contains the front-end HTML part of the page. Underneath it, you could see a file with the extension ending with CS, which act as a code behind, similar to the old ASPX pages. Now this page is completely written for the default behaviors inside the identity, but we have to make some changes as per our requirement. For now, inside this tutorial, we will be customizing this registration form for the newly added properties first name and last name. Now if you check the razor page, you could see these methods on getAsync, which is get invoked when we load the page, and when we submit this form, this post method will be invoked. Now if you check the page CSHTML, you can see that all of these fields are designed with the input model, which you can see inside this page as input model. Now to add input fields for first name and last name, we have to change this model here, input model. So first of all, we have first name. Now with this attribute display, we can specify the display name, which is the label that you want to show along with the corresponding input field. So here we go, name, first name. Now let's specify the data type of this text field as text. Now let's make this text field as required. Now let me copy paste this for last name and let's make the required changes here. Now inside the registration view, first of all, let's get rid of the unwanted HTML elements. So here we have the corresponding HTML for the registration page. We don't need this H1 element, and let's get rid of this grid system from Bootstrap. We have already added that inside the additional layout auth layout. Let me build this back to the app. Boom, that's it. Now let's add the input fields for first name and last name. We'll show both of them in a single row. So here we have the div row. We will have two columns with equal width. Now let's copy paste this email div here, input dot first name. Now let's make the appropriate changes inside these elements here. Now let's copy paste this for last name inside this second div. This is for last name. Sorry, we forgot to update the label here. First name, last name. Let's build the project and then back to the view. Boom, that's it. So here we have the new controls for first name and last name. So here we have done with the registration form design. Now let's update the submit or post method for feeding the data from these two newly added text boxes. So here we have the C# file. This onGetAsync method will be called for loading this form here, and when we submit this form, this post method will be invoked. The submitted data from the form can be received with this object here, input. So here we have the newly created user instance, which is going to be inserted into the physical DB in rest of the code. Now we just need to add first name and last name into it. So user dot first name is equal to input.firstname. Now you could see the suggestion from the IDE for populating the last name also. So hit tab. Now let's place them in a separate line like this. Username and email is assigned to corresponding properties here, and the user will be created with this method create async. Into that as a parameter we have passed the password, and that's the basic overview of this method. If the operation went successful, we will deal that inside this if clause. You can go through the rest of the codes here, one feature at a time, so that you can understand what is going behind the identity library. Having an overall idea will be helpful to customize the library further. Now let's build the project. Back to the view. Now let's talk about default validation for this registration form and related configurations. First of all, I will disable email verification for a newly created account. To disable the feature, head over to the program.cs file. You could see the service added here, add default identity, and here we have the configuration, require confirmed account. We will reset this property as false. Apart from assigning true to this property, there are some additional configurations to be done inside the project. Then only the verification mail will be sent to the corresponding given email. So that's the reason we are not implementing that in this video. If you are interested, we can discuss that in another tutorial. Let me know in comment box below. Now let's build this project. Back to the app. Now to see various default validations inside the registration form, just submit this fresh form so that you can see the various default validations. Here we have apply required validation for first name and last name, but inside the actual entity framework model we didn't mention these properties as required. So I'm going to remove the required validation for these properties, first name and last name. Now let's update the corresponding view here. We just need to remove this span. Let's build the project. Back to the view, submit the fresh form again. Now let's provide a random email here. I will provide the password as 123. Then you could see other validations coming up, like number of characters must be between 6 and 100. Now in order to see all of the existing default validations inside the identity, back to program.cs file, we can configure the validations like this. Builder.services.configure, and we want to configure identity options. So here we have the lambda expression with options. Now I'm going to disable one of the default validation, which is need of an uppercase character. So in order to disable that, we could do this password.require uppercase. We'll set that as false here. In order to see all of the default validations, right click on this require uppercase, then go to definition. You could see various validations inside this password options. Require length, that is minimum length should be 6, and there should be at least one unique character. Require non-alphanumeric character, meaning a special character. Then need of lowercase, need of an uppercase, require digit. By default all of these are set to true. Now we have just disabled this validation here, require uppercase. Okay, now let's build this. Back to the form, let's reload this. Now let's create a new user. Now first of all, I will try the password ABC, and here we have the validation error. It must be at least 6 character. Because of this default validation, we have to have a special character. So I will be appending @simple here, and we also need digits with this validation here. So I will append 1, 2, 3. So ABC at 1, 2, 3 is the password. We have to provide the same here, ABC at 1, 2, 3. Now let's submit the form. Boom, that's it. It looks like everything went successful. Now let's check inside this table users. You see, here we have the newly created user Eva Elliott. You could see the email here, then the password is hashed inside this column. So user registration is properly working. Now by default inside identity library, when we create a new user, the same user will be logged in by default, which you can see inside this success if clause here. If there is no need of email confirmation, you could see the code for sign in the same user. So currently inside this application we have already logged in. So next we are going to show the logged in user email address along with a logout button inside this NavBar. That will be done inside this default layout page here. So here we have the NavBar. First of all, I'll remove these nav links for home and privacy, which is here inside this unordered list. Now to show the logged in user, there is a partial view that comes with identity library, which you can see here, underscore login partial. We just need to render that inside this div here. So here we go, partial name is equal to underscore login partial. Now let's build this project, then back to the view here. Let me reload this page. See, here we have the greeting message with the email address, and here we have the logout button. Now for the proper placement of these elements, let's update this view. Instead of this container fluid, we need a container div. Now to move this div to the right side, we can have this class flex row reverse. Build the view, back to the app. Now let's try this logout button. That's it. Currently now you could see these links for register and login. We have already implemented this registration form. Now let's go ahead with this login form here. Inside that, we want to log in with the newly created user credentials. Before that, I want to remove these links for register and login from this app bar. Since it is already present inside this tab header, we don't need a separate links here. So that is coming from this partial view, login partial. Inside that, first of all, it checks whether the user is logged in or not. If the user is logged in, user email address and a logout button will be shown, and this else part is responsible for these links here. So let's get rid of it. Now let's customize this login view. So here we have the corresponding Razor page login CSHTML. First of all, we don't need this top H1 header. We only need this login form. So let's get rid of these grid columns here. Instead of 4 columns, we need 10 columns. In order to place it at center, we can have this class justify content center. Let's build the project, back to the view. That's it. In this tutorial, we are not implementing the email verification feature, so we don't need this link. And this is just to navigate a fresh registration form which can be accessed with this tab control. And we are not implementing this provision for forgot password inside this tutorial. So let's get rid of these links. In both of these forms, I have kept the top H2 header. It's up to you to remove or keep it. Inside this login form, I will change the text to something like welcome back. Now let's try to log in with the newly created user credentials. Now let's try to log in without selecting this option for remember me. Boom, that's it. So here we have successfully logged into the MVC application. Now let me show you the browser cookie where the user session is stored. For that, right click, then inspect, then switch to this application tab. Then from this left panel, select cookies. Inside that, we have the URL of this application. If you select that, you could see various cookies stored inside this application. Now this is the item we are talking about. Currently logged in user session will be stored inside this cookie here. Now inside this expires column, you could see the value session, meaning that the currently logged in user cookie will be lost once we close this browser. Now let's try to re-log in with the remember me option. Select this option remember me, then login. Now let's check the cookie. See, this time we have a date after 14 days, meaning by default, if we select remember me option inside the login page, the user session will last for next 14 days or 2 weeks. So that's all about logged in user cookie. Now let's check how to retrieve logged in user details. For example, logged in user ID, which we have inside this user table here, which is a crucial data which will be stored in other tables to know the activities done by a particular user. Now let me show you how to retrieve and display logged in user details inside this home page here. So here we have the home controller, and here we have the corresponding index view. So first of all, I will retrieve the user ID inside this home controller here. For that, we have to make use of the user manager object, which you can see inside these login and register pages here. Inside this code behind, you could see this user registration is done with an instance of user manager, as you can see here. See, we have created the user with an instance of user manager. We'll use the same instance inside this home controller also. For that, first of all, we have to inject the user manager inside this home controller constructor. So user manager, which is of the type application user, Now as a best practice, as you can see for this iLogger parameter here, there is a corresponding private read-only property and which is assigned with the parameter here. We will do the same for this user manager also. For that, when you place the cursor over this parameter, you could see a bulb icon here. Expand it, and then select this option, create and assign field user manager. Now to prefix this property with an underscore like this logo, let's rename this. For that, you can use this shortcut, hold Ctrl, then double press R, underscore user manager. Hit enter. So here we have injected an instance of user manager into this controller. Now to retrieve the logged in user details, we could do this underscore user manager. From that, we can call this method get user ID, and let's pass the user here, this dot user, which is corresponding to the logged in user. This is a claim which is details of user saved during the login operation. Okay, this is not an instance of this application user. You could verify that if you hover the cursor on it. You see, it is claims, meaning details of user saved during the login operation. Now let's save this inside the view data within this key user ID. Now let's print that inside this index view. Now here we go, user ID. Now we can retrieve that from the corresponding view data. Let's build this project, back to the view. Boom, that's it. You could see the same user ID inside this table also. So that's how you can retrieve the user ID or user claims saved during the login operation. Now let me log out from this application. Even though we are logged out, we are inside the home controller. Home controller will only be shown for the authenticated or logged in user. In order to prevent unauthorized users from accessing this home controller, inside the controller, home controller, we just need to add this attribute authorize. So we are telling that this is not for unauthorized users. Let's build the project, back to the view. See, here we are redirected to the login page. So this attribute authorize is already configured inside the identity library. You could verify it again. We are going to access the home controller, which is what we have the default route inside the application. By default, it will load this home controller index action method. See, we are getting redirected to the login page. Now we have to do the reverse operation also. That is, once a user is already logged in, if we try to access this login form or register view, we have to redirect him back to the home page. For that, inside this login page backend, inside this get async method, we just need to add this if clause. If user dot identity dot is authenticated is true, meaning that this user is already logged in. Now we just need to redirect him to the home page like this. Now let me copy this and pasting it inside this register on get async method. Let's build this. Now let's try whether it works or not. So here we are successfully logged into the application. Now if I try to access the login page or registration page, we'll be redirected back to the home page. Now if you click on this email address, you could see the corresponding user profile details. Update phone number, email address could be changed, password can be changed, then two-factor authentication, personal data, etc. and etc. As I mentioned already, to make use of the default features like email verification or this two-factor authentication or forgot password, we need extra configurations. If you guys are interested in implementing these features, we could extend this project in upcoming tutorials. Let me know your suggestions in the comment box below. Now, if you want to customize any of the identity features on your own, you could follow the same steps that we have initially followed inside this project. Just right click on this project, then add new scaffolded item, select identity, click on add. Select the appropriate views from this list and then select the same DB context from this drop down, which is auth DB context. Click on add. It will add the corresponding view and then you can customize your own. I have given the necessary MSDN documentation links in video description. Please go through that. You could download or clone this project from the GitHub repository link given in video description. There are a lot of helpful MVC tutorials in our channel. Links are given in video description under the title related videos. Hope you will enjoy it. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can also benefit from this. Have a nice day. Bye.